Hello, everyone. I'm Elijah Peters, a member of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee here for the IIDA's Northern California chapter. I am so very excited for this IIDA event today. Get ready for some more memorable moments than just the last 15 minutes, but memorable conversations and personal stories from our speakers who have all had incredibly unique journeys. I want to give a big shout out to the EDI sponsors for your support in helping our community create an optimistic impact as we learn and grow together, building equity and diversity and inclusion. Our titled sponsors for this event are GCI and Miller Knoll, and our supporting sponsors are RMW and KBM Hogue. Today, our conversation will be split into three sections. First, prominent designers. Second, professional look, which I'd like to advise everyone who's participating in this event that it will cover some sensitive topics. And finally, our last session will be when we open up for a audience participation in the Q&A. So now it is my pleasure to introduce to you, our host, Rashanda Udekwu.
Elijah, one last thing. We're going to unpack what is BIPOC? Like, what is it?
BIPOC, it stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. It's a term used quite frequently and regularly to express the community that comes together. So I hope that helps to set the stage for the conversation we're about to have.
Awesome. Really good. And then I think you change us back to gallery mode so that the audience can see us. Awesome. Really good. We're winging it tonight, and I love it. You guys have been amazing. Super patient audience. Thank you so much for still staying with us and logging in to see all of these amazing special speakers. We're going to dive right into it. They just told me they have all night. We're not going to stay all night, but if you have extra time like they do, we're really going to just have a conversation. I know behind the scenes, they have a glass of wine. Get your glass of wine. It's past 5 o'clock and we're ready to unpack this. And we're just going to introduce our speakers. I am not going to introduce them. I'm just going to call them by name. You've been waiting to hear from them, so let's get started. I want to first introduce Christina. Christina, introduce yourself, tell the audience who you are, and I will select our next speaker to say hello.
Okay, I'm Christina Cho Yu, and I'm co-founder of Atelier Cho Thompson. We are an architecture, interiors, and branding firm with offices in San Francisco and New Haven, Connecticut. And I'm also an adjunct professor at the CCA, or California College of Arts.
Awesome, so glad to have you. DeQuese May, please introduce yourself.
I'm not on mute. I'm DeQuese May, Vice President of Sales for Metro Contract Group. It's a local dealer here in Oakland, right in my backyard. It's good to be back. It's good to see everyone and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Maddy, please introduce yourself. So excited to see you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Maddy. I have been in the industry now for about 10 years, started as a designer, and I'm now on the sales side with Steelcase, working with the design community to bring spaces to life. And I'm just a big fanatic of great design and great furniture.
Awesome. Roderick, last but not least, introduce yourself, say hello to the audience, and we're going to start with you.
Yeah, no pressure bringing up the rear, but hi everyone, I'm Roderick Allen. I'm an interior designer at Quezada Architecture here in the city. Really just, here to craft beautiful spaces and have an important conversation.
Really good. So speaking of conversation, Roderick, tell everyone why this series started, beyond the fact that DEI, EDI, however you want to call it, is super important right now. Let's talk about how this actually got started and why we're doing a 3-part series.
Yeah, I guess I'll give everyone the Cliff Notes version because I think this is something very passionate on my end. It's kind of been a passion project. Kind of started about a year ago now. We got together on an IIDA call. Rashanda, being the VP of EDI for our Northern California chapter, was really just looking for voices to see, how can we continue the conversation? I know IIDA had a couple of conversations during the pandemic on topics such as being a BIPOC designer and other things, hiring for diversity, those kind of important topics. And we were trying to figure out what was like the next step in terms of continuing the conversation. I had this like little spark of an idea that was like, it'd be really cool to have a conversation series that just kind of builds off of each other, but also hits on really important topics that one, touch very home to our community as a whole and in terms of what we do, but then also are very poignant in just like everyday life. So I think Rashanda really saw the kind of kernel that was there and asked me to come back with a little bit more of a developed program. And now I think we're here today with a 3-part conversation series, kicking it off with Authentically BIPOC today.
Awesome. I think that's a great overview. So I love, Roderick, how you mentioned the personal stories. We've been on Zoom for over 2 years now and seeing each other's background, our house, and getting a little insight. So now let's go a little deeper and share some insightful journeys, stories of all of you guys. You're in this industry at different sectors. I'm going to dive in first. And if you see me looking over here, these are all my notes from all the conversations we have had, just to keep me on track here. But let's start out with the first question, which is, what cultural influences do you bring to your work? I know a couple of times we talked about reading the room. Christina, you talked about deep listening and the understanding the DNA of your client. Let's just kind of dive a little bit deeper in you guys' history as individuals, where you came from, if you were born in this country, if you weren't, if you came from the South or the Midwest. What are some cultural influences that have impacted your journey in our industry? Christina, I'll start with you.
Okay. So I'm Korean American. I was born and raised in Houston, Texas, and I've lived stints in France, Korea, and China, but for the most of my life, I've lived in America, and so in a lot of ways, I'm just very much American. But as people have actually asked me this in recent days, I realize, like, when I really unpack that in my head, that I'm very much influenced by my Korean culture, which, like some other API cultures, is a very high context collective culture, where reading between the lines, as you said, and reading the room is what you do intuitively, even though you may be totally born and raised in America. I think I've noticed. And so part of that is like really needing to actively listen and dive deep into understanding, in my line of work, the DNA of a client or an organization. And I think that kind of mode of working really is at the heart of how Ming, my business partner, and I operate. And I feel like even aesthetically so, because it's about focusing outward on what this client organization needs. Like, if you look at our portfolio, there isn't like a signature aesthetic. It's mostly about, understanding the DNA and distilling what that brand identity is for a client. I think another aspect of Korean culture is that a lot of us grew up in multi-generational households. And so we are very comfortable with like a lot of a diversity of voices and opinions, and feel like that's really helped me, especially when we do like public interest and community work, to like not really get intimidated by all these seemingly conflicting voices, but to learn how to build consensus. And I think I attribute a lot of that to my cultural background.
That's awesome. Christina, I love when you shared, especially about multi-generational. Speaking of multi-generational, Roderick, that reminds me of the story that you shared of working with your grandfather and the design of the different bands. Will you just kind of share a little bit of that? But also, I'll get back to the question as well. What cultural influences influences do you bring to your work? And also share that really amazing story that you shared about your grandfather and the design work you used to do with him.
Yeah, I'll start with that. I think for the most part, I've always been surrounded by design, even though I didn't know it. I used to spend summers with my grandparents. My grandma was very much an avid HGTV watcher, so I'll just put that embarrassing fact out there about why I got interested in interior design at a young age. But my grandpa actually used to basically rebuild custom like 70s and 80s, 60s vans. So he would literally find these vans in a junkyard and take them and turn them into like these magical kind of environments, like custom paint on the outside. He actually had this one van that everyone called Purple Rain. It was literally this like purple van that had a black Morton Salt girl painted on the outside. And then on the inside, it had cabinets, a fireplace, like tufted velvet sofa. Yeah, it was like, I think the challenge that he would always go through of making those spaces and turning them into something that was, really creative and something that, eventually people that were in that kind of field of work would take these to events and actually show them off to get awards, was something that I think subliminally maybe impacted the way I think about design. Because it's always like taking what and then putting a twist on it and like adding the unexpected. We obviously, we go to school, we learn the basics, we learn how to design as we are young designers. And then as we get into, mid-level and senior designers, I think it's really about taking kind of the base that we have and really, pushing what we know and how can we make that an unexpected journey for our clients. So that's that story. And then in general, I think similar to what Christina said in terms of reading the room, not to bring the mood down, but I think, growing up as a Black male, you have that conversation about, you have that police conversation with your parents. And I think immediately that kind of teaches you how to read people's energies in a sense that maybe not other people will do naturally. So I feel like you can kind of read the room non-verbally as well. It doesn't always have to be about listening to what people are saying, but you can kind of just sense the mood in the room in a different sense. And I think that really helps because my mom has always said, it's not what people say, it's what people do. And yes, you can always have someone tell you something, but if their actions speak differently or the way that they are holding themselves speaks differently, then it's really, you kind of have to get down to the deep part of that. And I think that really helps kind of distill, the information that we get from our clients, at least personally for me as a designer, the information that I get from my clients into a solution that, truly gets to the heart of what they said, even if they may not have told me exactly what they wanted.
Wow. I love how you went and kind of gave us a little bit of a deep dive of what is it to read the room. But also I love how your grandfather was doing Pimp My Ride before that was even a thing, which is pretty incredible. Maddy, that reminds me of the story that you also shared, which I think goes, even if folks have not seen Maddy's Instagram page, it's amazing. It's well crafted. You talk about celebrating craftsmanship and celebrating really beautiful design. How has your cultural, what cultural influences do you bring to your work, especially in your love for celebrating beautiful design?
Yeah, thank you. That's a big compliment. I feel, so I'm Indian. I'm an Indian immigrant. Moved here when I was 8 years old with my family, and I honestly, I hadn't thought about this question until it came up when we were discussing it earlier. And I think like as a creative and as a designer, whether it be in my own home or like anything, I've always kind of moved towards, handcrafted product, because I think when I was growing up, like in India, we have actually my family, like we were really, deep into like the arts, and my mom and my grandma would like take us to places where I would see like, Indian rug makers who would literally be hand weaving these rugs, right? I mean, the most intricate hard work that like goes into creating these beautiful rugs, and like seeing like block printing and textiles. And I just fell in love with the story that comes with that. And I think it just, you know, when you see it here, a lot of times, like, you don't really hear about the story or like know what the origin of those products is. And yet we have, like, some people have like Persian rugs in their homes, or have, like, you know, all these just beautifully handcrafted pieces. And so I think I gravitate towards those things. I have a deep appreciation for those things. And I mean, as much as I can support that personally, that's a passion of mine, and hope to just kind of, through Nalea, which is my Instagram page, just like inspire other people to also, you know, support those as much as they can.
DeQuese May. What cultural influences do you bring to your work? We know that you were in tech recently. You came back to our industry. You're now the VP at Metro, which is one of the, Metro Group is one of the only Black minority-owned dealers, I think, even in the Bay Area at all. Just talk to us a little bit, like, why you came back and what cultural influences do you bring to your new role at Metro?
There's only 3 Black-owned dealerships in the country of the United States. But culturally, I'm from Kentucky. So I'm blue-collared, hardworking, rural area kind of guy behind the scenes. It was my community was very Black and white. And it was a community of harmony. I mean, to be completely honest, little town called Shelbyville. And my mother, from the day that I can remember seeing her, she worked hard. My grandparents worked hard. My dad worked hard. My aunts worked hard. They all came over here and like worked all the time. And like, here I am, like going to school and like doing these cool things. And, you know, I take a step and I look back, and, you know, that foundation they gave to me is just like synonymous in the work that I do. I don't think about it. Like, I just work hard. So when I show up, I try and bring my best self, because that's kind of what they instilled in me. And kind of that harmony is something, I mean, you all probably, if you don't know me, you'll tell from this call, but like, I love people. I love being around people. I love engaging with people. I like challenging people, and I like to be challenged. So the move to tech, while was great at the beginning of the pandemic, but it started to like kind of show me what things that I internally was missing. And it was support, right? It was the community, and like this right here, what we're doing, it fell on deaf ears when I tried to bring it up. So, you know, being from a humble background, like, I just want to put my head down and work hard. But now, you know, we have a stage to kind of showcase some of that hard work that we do. And I think it's great. So here we are, looks like the United Nations on this call, but we all have different skill sets that I think other people are going to realize we have, that in turn didn't think that maybe we had, or didn't think about it in general. So, I mean, just growing up, working hard, and then being here, you know, with opportunities and the support, like, it's been great.
That's awesome. I love how you actually went to tech, got the opportunity to go to tech, and now you're back with us. And
I know, it's a vacuum.
People are so glad to see you. So thank you for sharing that. I know that was my first question to you. And I'm sure the audience and some folks who know you would be curious about that as well. Now that you guys have unpacked some of your personal stories, the influences that you're, you know, where you came from, your roots, your background, let's get into a little bit of like so a little bit more, and kind of expand upon it a little bit. Who is a prominent BIPOC designer that you've been influenced by? And when was the first time you became aware of their influence on your work? And I know, Christina, we started with you before, and I actually have a few names here, but there was a really beautiful story, Maddy, that you shared about color, like bursting out with a particular person. I'm not going to say their name because I want you to share the story, but let's start there. And then DeQuese, you have some folks that are local that are here and maybe even in the audience that I'd love for you to unpack after Maddy.
Yeah, so I know when we were talking about this, I had mentioned that one of the, designers of color that really inspires me is Justina Blakeney. So she's an LA-based designer, and what I really love about her, and for those of you who know me and anyone out there who knows me, it's actually not like she's a bohemian, like that's kind of her design, is a new modern sense of bohemian style, and it's totally not my personal design style. But what I love about her is that she is so against the grain. Like, it's not what's on trend, it's not what you're seeing on Instagram when you're scrolling through, looking at all these pictures. She is so authentically herself in her design, and it like pours into it. It's almost like herself just poured out into her interiors. And I love that about her. She inspires like beauty and I think joy through color, especially. I mean, she has like vivid colors in her design. So I just think, yeah, I mean, I love the way that she's gone about it, how she's crafted a space, that's all about what she finds beautiful and joyful. And it's very unique.
That's awesome. I always imagine her spaces when you start talking about her. I think it lends itself to that. DeQuese, you talked about two women who are actually in our industry that we probably have ran into at different events. You talked about Nadia, and I'm always so nervous about saying her name because I want to say it properly. And you also talked about Julia. Will you share who those BIPOC designers that you have been influenced by, and when did you realize that you were influenced by women who you actually know and network with and you see? You're on mute.
There it is. Always one, always one. Yeah, so to kind of follow up on that, Nadia, she's awesome. Julia Witherspoon is another one. And I'm gonna give a list because I gotta give my shout outs. Cheryl Jackson, Jacinda Jones, Roderick, who's on our panel, and Lisa Way. So when I first came into the industry, I was new, I didn't know anyone. And these were a few of the people that kind of like took me under a wing, gave me some advice, and had real conversations with me. Those are kind of the first people in design that I met. So when I meet people, like, I just don't kind of toss you off. Like, if I feel that you're a great person, I want to keep you in my realm. So I continue to have that good feeling. And to see each of them grow in their profession by being new team leads, by being project leaders, by going and crafting their own thing, and then just bringing a different attitude toward design. I understand that it's like it's an outlier, and I always see outliers. I always look for those first, and they've been able to continue to be successful. So when I look at those people I just mentioned, it's people that have been working hard and they're starting to see the fruits of their labor, and I see it. So that hard work doesn't just go by the wayside. Like, it's really a climb, and that's why I think they're very important to me, because I look at that as well. But yeah, those are my folks. There's probably some more, but those are definitely the ones that kind of stick out to me.
That's awesome. Thank you for giving a shout out to designers. Like, first of all, Roderick, you're right here on this panel, but secondly, on the dealer side, having those influential conversations with designers, and designers who can tell you what they like, they don't like. And DeQuese, I love that you're on this panel coming from that dealer world. You and I know it very well. And also even from the manufacturer side, that's also very influential in our industry. So I love that we have these different voices in the room today. Roderick, you were just named. Do you have any comment there? But also, who is your BIPOC designer you have been influenced by? And when did you first become aware of their influence in your life?
Well, one, I want to say thank you. a humble brag moment. I never really recognize that I influence people. I'm just kind of a person who's here to have a good time and like hopefully put smiles on people's faces. So that's honestly great to hear. And in terms of BIPOC design influences, I'm a little weird in the fact that like I don't think I really subscribe to a designer. I've always been a person who's like, I want to take the things around me and then abstract it into what I see. It's probably only child trauma, who knows? Should probably get a therapist for that. But like rules to me, this is probably a bad way to put it, but rules to me are kind of just like, you know, the guardrails. I can color outside of the lines if I want to. So generally, like in terms of design influence, I'm going to say like my grandma, and just the way that she carried herself. I think design's it's like much more than just what you do physically with the space or how you think about design, but it's also how you carry yourself. And I've never met anyone who just carried themselves with just like so much like poise and grace and just like was so well respected. So I always just like wanted to be just as respected as her when I grew up, or when I'm growing up, I guess still. And then generally in terms of just like the way to approach something, it's a little basic, but I have been a Beyonce stan since she was in Destiny's Child. I think about the way that she has really approached her career and the way that she thinks about implementing things. She isn't someone who rests on her laurels, and I feel like that's me. I never want anyone to be like, oh, I know Roderick designed that project. I want them to be like, I could see how maybe he designed that project, but it feels fresh and it feels new.
Wow.
So I kind of think in that terms of like how to actually craft the story and not who I find inspiration in.
Thank you for flipping the script on the question. And I really like that, Roderick, especially two women who have been influential in your life, but for different reasons. Christina, I do want to ask you the same question. I have the person here that you named, but who is a prominent BIPOC designer who you've been influenced by, and when did you realize that they were influencing your work?
So my answer to that question was Billy Chen of Todd Williams. Billy Chen. She, I guess, most recently designed the Obama Foundation, and many decades ago, I decided to, well, not many, but like 20 plus years ago, I decided to change my career to architecture, in large part due to her. I was working as a structural engineer at a company called Arup, and we were working on her library at Berkeley. And I started looking up some of her projects and was just really inspired. And so I actually got to interview her last year, and I was just really taken aback by, I guess you could say, like a humble confidence that she exuded. In large part, kind of taken aback because I'm sure you've seen articles like Asian people are the least promoted to management. And there are like Harvard Business articles about this. And I think, and when I talk, I teach at the CCA. When I talk to Asian students, they often feel like they have to be a certain way to become a leader or be recognized. Like that's sort of antithetical to the way that maybe in America or like perceived leaders should be, like the more louder, charismatic, bombastic type. And so when I met her, and I just felt like she was such a quiet and confident person, which are kind of unique, like a unique combo to possess. It was just very reassuring. And I felt like I could go back to my students and kind of tell them that you don't need to be inauthentic to become a leader. I think also part of her firm's philosophy is like believing that architecture is an act of profound optimism. And I think my firm really draws on that principle as well, because we're really committed to leveraging like smart design and creativity to make design accessible to more and more types of people, not just like the privileged types that historically get serviced by architecture. And I think also, I'm also influenced by how she often talks about slowness in design, because like, especially in America, but also in Korea, like everything is about doing things quickly. And technology helps you do things even quicker. And it's just not really a virtue that's talked a lot about in design. And I think just connecting with your intuition is part of that slowness, allowing yourself to iterate and not just jump to a conclusion a priori about what your design is going to be, I think is something that I take to heart a lot, and our firm does too. I think a lot of people who join our firm are often kind of surprised that we take our time to design and iterate a lot more than they were used to. And so I'm definitely like influenced by her in a lot of ways.
That's awesome. I love how you mentioned different types of leadership style that you recognized in her, which was more of a quiet, strong leader. And yes, in American culture, the most outspoken, the most bombastic, sometimes those people who are charismatic are looked at as leaders, but sometimes leadership does not show up like that. And I like how you realized, look how this is feeling to me. And you recognized her leadership, but not only that, also speaking to the students that you have to foster in them that they should be their authentic selves, and they don't have to pretend or be this American version of leadership, but what does leadership feel like to them? We're gonna head into another segment here, and I just want to share this with the audience. Elijah mentioned this earlier, and some of you might be wondering, like, there's a couple of people on the screen and one of them isn't talking. Elijah is helping to run things behind the scenes, but he's also here on screen with us. He's also one of our committee members. And one of the things he said, for those of you who have joined us midway through, is that we are going to talk about some things that are also uncomfortable. They are not meant to make you feel uncomfortable in the way that you feel attacked, but they are meant to make you aware of how we can, create changes to things that might be systematic and how we can unpack that together. And one tool in kind of leveraging change is to have hot conversations, or is what I like to call them, honest, open, and transparent. So here we go. We're going to go into the other segment here. And I also just want to give a shout out to our panelists and our panelists/speakers, for actually just being upfront and honest with you, because the audience, you guys aren't just taking this in, but they're also sharing real life stuff. Like, these are real people. We also mentioned, what is it to be a professional? What is it to look professional and be taken seriously? So the first question we have here, which is, what did it mean to look professional when you started your career versus what does that mean to look professional today? Now, Roderick, you talked a little bit about being a rebel and going against the grain. And if anybody has seen you at an event, you might appear in all kinds of outfits. So when did you feel, I want you to answer the first question that I had, and I can restate it again. But I also want to know, when did you feel comfortable showing up the way you wanted to show up in spaces? So it's a two-part question. First, what did it mean to look professional when you started your career versus today? And then when did you feel like, you know what, if I want to wear those heels, I'm wearing it?
Yeah, so I am also a Midwest person. I know DeQuese mentioned he's somewhere from the Midwest, and I know Rashanda, you're from the Midwest. So I think there's a sense of traditionality, if that's even a word, in the Midwest. You in college, I went to college at Purdue, which was also in the Midwest. You go to these portfolio reviews or like mock interviews, and you're kind of told, men or people who identify as male, you wear slacks, a button up, depending on how buttoned up the firm is, maybe throw on a tie in there, but you should at least have, like a good polo, a couple of pairs of slacks and a button up shirt. I think was always the little like closet that you were told to have as growing up as someone who identifies as male. But I think by coming here to San Francisco, a whole new journey. I think I also now identify as non-binary, so I don't really see the like gender line between clothes. I'm like, where it makes you feel good. In terms of like, when did I feel comfortable? It's kind of I don't know if there ever is comfort in a sense, kind of a hard thing to mention, but like you kind of have to just lead with hope in a sense that whatever space you're walking into is a space you're going to be accepted in, a space that you're going to feel welcome. I don't think there's ever just like this holistic, like I'm going to walk into every space and feel 100% comfortable. You kind of just have to take the dive and say, this is who I am as a person. But I think it also helped by, side note, I'm a drag queen. So I think it helped finding a community of people who, just support you authentically and who you are, and are those people that like you could call at 2 a.m. if you're having an issue. And just knowing that you have that support close to home here, and it's not just the family that you have back home who are thousands of miles away, kind of helps reinforce and bolster like the moves that you want to make as a person. So I think, the moment also I walked into the office and I wore heels and like, it was maybe like a 90%, applause. I was like, that's all I need. You're not always going to get the 100%, but at least 90% is good enough for me.
I love it. I
That's
did
an
not
A, Roderick.
know. I did not, and you guys chime into each other, DeQuese, so that's good. Roderick, I didn't know that even in your boldness, that there was a little bit like, I'm not sure, but you know what, this is me and I'm going to do it. So that actually gives me a new perspective to it, because whenever I've seen you, I just see a lot of power and confidence. I didn't know that there was this other little piece that's like, but you own it. You own it. And that's really powerful. And I think that actually may help folks in the audience who may be feeling a couple of different ways about their own situation. Maddy, this goes to something that you mentioned. What has it meant to look professional at the beginning of your career and now versus today? And you mentioned a couple of things, your hair, and you also mentioned Zoom. I'm going to let you unpack those how you like, but you mentioned some really powerful moments during the conversations that we had previously, and I'd love for the audience to hear thoughts there.
Yeah. Roderick, thank you for sharing. I think that was, I really resonated with what you said about never fully feeling comfortable. I think it's a journey. It's never 100%. It's never 100%, but you show up anyway. And I think that, hair was a big part of my journey for sure. I mean, even when I was young, that was how I found I used it to assimilate a lot. Like how I modified my hair was how I assimilated to American culture, and I think that was like a big part of my journey growing up. And truth be told, it wasn't until the pandemic hit that I really started to kind of unpack some of that. And just as like a side note, it's because I know we were talking about that, Rashanda, and you had mentioned like, oh, well, this is the reason I do it. And I was like thinking about it, and I was like, you're right. It's not so much about it's not about like how I show up, like how my hair is done, whether it's natural, whether it's straight. It's not about that. It's about the why, and why do I feel, or why do I want to show up in a certain way? And during the pandemic, what we were talking about and what I had noticed is that like, you have a certain sense of yourself when you show up in a space, like, you have like a general idea of like what you look like, especially in comparison to everyone else. But for me, it's always gone away pretty quickly because, I don't have an accent, and there's a lot about me that I don't feel like it really stands out. But when we started to get on Zoom during the pandemic, it was like, not only are you seeing yourself in all of these conversations, but you're also seeing like everyone else who's in the meeting with you and in these conversations with you. And in my case, for the companies I've worked for, or, in the meetings that I've been a part of, everyone looked different than I did, like almost everyone else. And I was the only one who looked the way that I did. And so I found it becoming a little bit harder because I didn't want to always show up with my hair done, or, I didn't always want to like show up with my makeup done, and like, especially during the pandemic. And so I don't know, that was like something I really had to work through. And I would just have a lot of conversations with my partner, just being like, hey, like, I don't feel like showing up, all put together, but I feel like I need to. And we had to like really work through that. anyway, I think, you know, I'm somewhat on the other side of that. Like I mentioned earlier, I think it's an everyday conversation. I think it happens, you know, often, where I kind of have to like break it down for myself. Like, all right, Maddy, like, you know, why are you feeling this way? Or why do you feel like you need to do these things? And yeah, that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Maddy, for being vulnerable there. I'm going to do something. I'm actually going to say something that's a little unconventional here because you weren't officially part of the speaker. But Elijah, you're sitting here on this call and my brain just keeps going, why isn't Elijah be a part of this conversation? Because you were even part of the conversation when we were unpacking a lot of these things. So I will start calling on you because I just think it looks weird that you're on the call and you're not saying anything and you have some profound things to say. So I just want to mention that. And then I want to go on to Christina. And there was another part that you actually mentioned, a little different from some of the folks on this call when it came to what did it mean to you to look professional when you first started your career versus today. And you mentioned something else. You mentioned age and feeling like you look too young to have credibility when you walked into the room. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, now I'm at an age where I want to look younger, but I do remember in my early 20s when, you know, I looked like I was in high school. And I think I looked like I was in high school for a while. And I remember distinctly when I was at a firm, this guy who was like 6 to 8 years younger had a lot of gray hair. And so he was just treated in a certain way and everyone assumed he was more senior. And so that was long, I guess, an insecurity of mine. And as I mentioned, like I'm sort of at an age where that's a non-issue. And if I were to pinpoint like maybe an inflection point, it's probably when I had kids and I was too tired to care anymore. And also like when you get to a certain level of experience, like you just have more confidence and you start to tend not to care as much what people think, which I do like about getting older. But yeah, so for me, it wasn't so much about what I wore, but more so about like how young I looked. But I did want to share a funny story. I remember I was working at an East Coast firm, and we were working East Coast being, you know, a little more traditional or than the West Coast being more laid back. And we were working on a Silicon Valley company, and I remember the principals actually telling us all to wear jeans. And so I think professional dress is often linked to where you are, but then also who your client is. So whenever I have a meeting with a tech client, I know they're going to be in like a fleece jacket and jeans. And so I kind of unknowingly probably dress down.
Yes. You actually just touched on the segue to DeQuese, because DeQuese, in my notes, I have a couple of things for you. You went to the tech world. You know the tech bro being a bro, but also not being a tech bro. And you have a couple of stories to share about looking professional or even looking the part. And then we're going to segue over to Elijah, but please unpack what it was for you in the tech industry specifically. You have a lot. I'm just going to let you go because looking professional when you started versus how that feels for you today. Well, talk about your experience that you had.
It is a great question. So originally started my career on the East Coast. So like Christina was saying, it's very, you know, you got your pleated pants, you know, you got your starched white shirt from the dry cleaners, wear a tie if you're feeling froggy, but you're very professional in that sense. And when I came out here, like the first interview I had with Herman Miller, the hiring manager was like, take your tie off. So there was a big difference of, you know, from East Coast to West Coast, so geographically. But then, you know, going over to, you know, to tech from our industry, like I started to get kind of comfortable in how I dressed. You know, I would throw a suit on, but, you know, I'll throw on some Nike Blazers or something to kind of keep it casual. But my first interview with tech company I was with, the gentleman showed up with suit, tie, and his jacket didn't match his pants. Whatever, but like I have a thing about that. And I asked him, I'm like, so is this typically, kind of like what you wear when you go on, client meetings? And he was like, yes, we want to make sure we're, showing up professional and we look presentable. And in my head, I'm like, dude, you live in Texas, like we're in California, like everybody that we're going to talk to is like dressed like me. But, what you were saying, it like gets you back to like, what is a professional look? What is presentable? And I think I'm always presentable, but according to him, like there was something. So I kind of knew that there were some nuances there about how I dress. But, when you're in the Bay Area, like I saw a guy and he was like in his sleep clothes. So, and he's going to the office, and then you see somebody and they might have on a prom tux or something. So it's everywhere in between here. And like Roderick said, it's like what makes you comfortable. And I feel like, once you do have some tenure behind you, once you do have confidence, some of that starts to go to the wayside. But even today, like before the call, I was like, should I wear this shit? Can I say shit? Whatever, sorry. But I'm like, should I wear this shirt or should I switch up to something more comfortable? And then it's just that innate thing in me. Like I always felt the need to look presentable, and whatever those Western American standards were. So for the most part, like if you ever meet me or see me, like I have a blazer on and, maybe like a polo or a nice shirt. But if you see me on the weekend, yeah, I'm not wearing that. So I totally get, what you guys are saying. And it is, from beginning to like where I am now, I think what most of it is where I live and confidence.
Let's go a little deeper. And I know our friend Elijah here does not have any qualms with going deeper. And let's talk about the other part to looking professional. And I'm sure our audience who joined was like, can we get some depth in this conversation? Code switching. Let's talk about that. When we talked about hair, we talked about like, okay, so people switch up our styles in order to kind of speak the language, right? Whether that's you're in New York and you're speaking the language, it's an unsaid language that you belong there. Folks who are, people of color sometimes feel more pressure to do that, especially Maddy, if you're representing a company and you're a woman of color and you want to show up a certain way and be taken seriously. Let's unpack what that is, from the way we dress, from hair, mannerisms, a certain way of being in a space. Elijah, let's talk about code switching.
Yeah. So thanks for this one. Yeah, code switching. So for those who don't know me, I am half Black, half white, a Californian through and through. And when I first started my corporate career back in 2005, 2006, even through the interview process, I realized that I needed to present I'm not around my family like voice, right? Like how I present myself, the words that I use need to be very much a yes officer, no officer, way of parsing myself. And, the looking professional, comes through not just how, for me, it was the same as DeQuese. It was like you got your black slacks, your pressed white shirt, and a tie all day, every day. I don't care if it's 106 degrees down in LA, you are wearing a tie. And anything that is short of representing the aesthetic that the professional group around me wanted to see, limited the experience that I would have in developing and growing my own career. Within the first month that I worked at that corporation, my boss, who was thoughtful and kind, was like, you need to go to Toastmasters and you need to actually like learn how to present yourself and how to talk for yourself. And it was it was disheartening because it was basically saying like, even though you are hired to do the job and you are doing the job well, I've got zero complaints about how you do this job. If you want to keep this job, if you want to progress in your career, I need you to look in a way, I need you to sound in a way that I find aesthetically pleasing.
Interesting.
So for me, it was 6 years in that organization of moving up, it moved from Southern California to the headquarters here in the Bay Area, and I had a full wall of white shirts and a few pink ones. I like my colors. And when I finally decided to leave that organization, step out into actually the tech world in 2012, I did the unthinkable, which is just be myself. Just be myself. And that means like you see me in the office, I'm gonna say the sayings that I said in Sacramento, in LA. I'm going to have that like, hey, we're cousins kind of conversation with you. And as you can see, this is not my most colorful Hawaiian shirt, but like it's a Hawaiian shirt. I used to be clean shaven and my hair was short like DeQuese. It was a 3 on the side, a 5 on top. And then once I started to allow myself to not be limited by someone else's perspective of myself, I felt like I started blossoming. I mean, look at this mane. This is insane. This is crazy, right? So for myself, I don't hesitate to be myself anymore. Now, the code switching still comes in every once in a while when I find it appropriate to connect with someone, because I understand that there is still learning to translate the words that I'm using and the way that I present it so that it reaches you in a way that I believe is how you're going to receive it the same way I want it to be received, right?
Yeah.
But outside of that, I mean, it's not 5:05 and it changes. It's going to be like 8:05 in the morning. You get the same exact Elijah. You get the same experience. You get the same gruffy beard and maybe a few colorful words like DeQuese dropped here. And I feel like that's what code switching has been for me in my career.
Yeah. I can tell DeQuese wants to jump in. DeQuese, go ahead and jump in. And then I want to pivot over to Roderick really quickly, because there was something that he mentioned during his interview process that he just previously went through. And I want to mention that.
Yeah, I was just going to say the code switch is real. Don't even know you do it. And my friends call me out on it. And it's actually kind of funny. If you reach DeQuese from, sorry, I'm talking in third person. I'm saying what they said. If you reach me between the hours of like 7:30 and like 5:36, it's hello, this is DeQuese, and it's, it's inviting. But if you get me after 6:30, like it's probably like, yo, what up? And like, that's just how I'm to my mother, my grandparents, anybody like that they know me, like that's how I answer. And it's still a hello and it's a greeting, but like I innately will like turn that over with someone I don't know, because I don't want them to think have a pre-connotation of like either what I'm gonna say next or what I can't do. So like I have to like double think a lot, because I have, your reaction to an answer is to like just shoot a response, but like it's like I have to think about it and then I let it go, because I want everyone, I know my audience, I want everyone to relate to what I'm saying, but also understand it and not think it's coming from somewhere out of left field. So yeah. Elijah, the code switch is real, brother.
Yeah. Thank you, DeQuese, for sharing that. There are so many things, and then we're going to have to actually let the audience in pretty quickly for Q&A. But Roderick, we talked about this a little bit, not necessarily code switching, but what can companies do to attract and retain really amazing talent? And I'm still staying in that same vein here, because you said something that was really powerful, and I actually wrote it down. When you were interviewing at different design firms, we are often hearing, how can we add to the culture? Like, how can we fit into the culture is what we're usually typically told. How can you fit into the culture? How do you fit into the culture? It's part of the interview question process kind of thing. You said you were not asking, how can you fit into the culture? You were looking to be a culture add. You were looking to build to the culture. And that's actually a switch of the words, but it's also a switch in the mindset. It's not fitting in. It's how can you add your own talent? How can you add your own spin? How can when you can share your own story here, but like when the design firm is hiring different clients, how can they actually relate to you specifically because they have a guy who looks like you, or not a guy. I'm messing up here. Non-binary person at their firm that's able to relate and show up a different kind of way. So even as you were looking at design firms or companies on their website, what types of faces were you seeing in the leadership? What kind of messages were you getting? And sometimes I don't think firms realize what that means to people who are looking for jobs or looking to join their organization, but talk about what it was. How can I add and build to the culture versus fitting in?
Yeah, it kind of started, I can't remember where I was, but I just saw this phrase. It was like, you don't really want to fit into the culture. You want to bring your best self to work, which I think we always talk about, but bringing your best self to work isn't you fitting into culture because it's just a perpetuation of what happened before. So it's more so like, I think when I was interviewing, it was like it was the questions and the way that people ask them. They were more so, some people kind of ask questions in a way that's like, oh, we're looking to see if you're a good fit here, just personally. Other people are asking questions in more of like a probing manner of like, who are you as a person? Yep. So I think when you ask questions in a sense that gets to the heart of who you are as a person, you get this sense that they're not just looking for someone to come in, grind out drawings, be a good client contact or somebody. They're looking for somebody who can come in and really, add to what they're doing, help grow them, take them beyond kind of the space that they're in right now. So I think that was one of the big things that I was really looking for in a job. And I think I just also want to touch again on the code switching thing is like, it is absolutely real. I'm just going to put it out there again, because I always think about how just like one, like being here as a designer, but two, being a drag queen. I literally tell everybody that's my second job. It's not all fun and games. It is actually work, but it's funny how sometimes I'll answer my phone and I'll be like, when I answer a work call, I'm like, hi, this is Roderick. It's just so cut and dry. Like, I feel like I could be at someone's sales center. But it's more so like and it touches back to adding to the culture. It's like when you can take those phone calls and just be like, hey girl, how's it going? And no one in your office looks weird at like, who's this person talking to? Or, you can just, be yourself, walk into the office. I think also in terms of outfits, I think one of the most chic outfits I've ever worn was a matching sweatsuit in a tan color with a long navy like jacket and matching navy pumps. And I didn't get like an eye batted at me at all walking into the office. So I think it was just like, one, being able to bring your personality, two, being able to bring who you are authentically as a person, and three, then nobody batting an eye at that or like having a water cooler conversation to the side really shows that they're looking for people to actually bring them full selves to work, which will only enhance the culture at the place that you're at.
Mm-hmm. I'm really, Roderick, thank you for sharing that, because I think that's really impactful. Maddy, you just unmuted yourself. You want to jump in here? I'm still looking at the list of questions we have, and then I'm like, because I'm looking at the time and I want to get our audience in, but there's some really good things that I want to jump into before we do that. But Maddy, go ahead.
Just really quick, I wanted to add it because I think it is a different perspective. Accents. I think that's another one. Like when we're talking about code switching, that's something that I feel like I've grown up. It's like switching between my two accents. Like when I talk, if my mother were to call me right now and I picked up the phone, I would speak with an Indian accent. Like it would happen automatically. And then if you asked me a question, I would switch back without even realizing that I had done it. And so I think when we're talking about that, like that's so real. And I think from that context, from my context as well, it's like accents is a big part of it. And I think when I look at like the professional landscape too, it's, I know that that's challenging for a lot of people. Like, it's not as easy as it was maybe for me to have that ability to switch between one and the other. And I think a lot of people are working with that. And there is this perception of how they're perceived just because they have an accent. Specifically, I think like an Indian accent or an Asian accent. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there as well.
That's really good. And Maddy, that goes into one of the things you brought up about being like how we present ourselves. And one of the questions here is, how do you internalize non-BIPOC requirements or expectations to be considered professional for leadership? And Maddy, you specifically talked about wearing a nose ring. And we know Rhea Butler, who's a studio director at Gensler. Not only does she have a nose ring, she's got the dreads, she's absolutely stunning. But talk to us a little bit about what that was like for you, because that's actually your heritage. But that was also a moment that you had like, wait a minute, should I show up to work and would I be considered as a professional? Could I get promoted with a nose ring in? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I love that Rhea's like representing and, you know, being authentic in that way, because I think what we kind of uncovered during the conversation was, I was just sharing for the audience, I was just sharing that like when I started in, you know, my career, I had a nose ring. It was something I got when I was 18 years old. And like in Indian culture, like tattoos and stuff, that's like not something that our parents really allow, but you know, nose rings for women, for Indian women, it's like a common thing. And so my mom and I actually shared that, you know, and I thought that was really cool. So I got it when I was 18. And then sometime like along the way, as I became a professional and as I kind of started to, I think it really was around like wanting to kind of be promoted or like move into more, you know, forward facing positions and things like that, that I started to kind of, I internalized this notion. No one told me explicitly. No one was like, hey, Maddy, take out your nose ring. Like it doesn't look, you know, professional, but it was the explicit, like it was the implicit, you know, notion that if I look this way, I'm not going to be promoted into a position of leadership, or I'm not going to be in these forward facing positions, because no one around me that was in those positions looked like that. Like no one had a nose ring. I don't think in any organization that I've ever worked in, you know, who held like a leadership position. And so I think that's
until Rhea.
And so I love that. I love that because it really does, honestly, it's allowing other people to feel like they can show up in that way. And like, that's why they say representation matters. It really does. It just matters to see yourself represented in leadership positions in an authentic way that resonates with you.
Yes. And you're segueing right into my next question. Thank you very much. And also just, I mean, again, a big shout out to Rhea on that matter, because it's interesting because she just probably sees it as her personal style, but at the same time, she's doing something really powerful every day she shows up to a meeting, and that's what clients can see. The last part that I want to touch on are two things, and Christina and DeQuese, I'd love for you guys to answer this. Is how are you and your network creating a seat at the table for folks? Because we're talking about being professional, we're talking about what it is to be professional, what it is to show up authentically. All of these things that you guys covered today and sharing your own personal story and your journey. Christina, you have an organization that you recently started called Rising Tides. DeQuese, you started the Black Design Collective a couple of years ago, way before any of the stuff that happened during 2020 with George Floyd. But you also are now a VP of sales at Metro Group. So those are two impactful, very influential spaces to be in. Christina, I want to start with you with Rising Tides. Share with the audience what that is, why you started it, and what does that mean for you creating a seat at the table for folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think DeQuise's organization is a lot more established than ours because we just launched last month. So obviously we haven't put on a lot of events or executed a lot of our initiatives, but the intent in creating this design collective was to cultivate API leadership and kind of amplify or make more visible API designers who worked in the built environment. And part of the reason why we started this was, I mean, I guess sharing a personal anecdote. I mean, growing up in Texas, I've been just very used to being the only Asian person in the room. And so I've never really felt the need to be part of a bigger Asian community. But a point of inflection for me really was like a couple years ago when those Asian women were murdered in Atlanta. And it was really emotional. And I think that was a point where I felt drawn to be part of a bigger community, to come together and to change things. And since then, we've seen an uptick in Asian hate crimes through the pandemic. And so kind of motivated by a personal anecdote, but it was a common sentiment amongst some colleagues of mine. And so we started this group last month. And we have an event coming up in September, which I will put up on LinkedIn and share with you all. But some of the other initiatives that we have planned are to work with ethnic neighborhoods and cities to promote storytelling, because a lot of ethnic neighborhoods are sort of in danger of kind of diminishing. And so how do you preserve some of the stories through the public sidewalk or plazas and such? And so we've been working with a DPW San Francisco leader on something. We also often, a lot of us in the founding team got invited to speak about architecture at schools. And one of the Q&A, the questions was like, how do you promote more diversity in schools? And so on an individual level, we've been asked to speak, but I think how do you make that more scalable, you know? And I think we can all agree that when we learned about architecture, it was sort of like Greek and Roman architecture, the Egyptian pyramids, and Frank Lloyd Wright and Frank Gehry, you know, and it's sort of, that's what most people know. And like, how do we expand people's knowledge of architecture? And so we're working on some way to kind of influence curriculum at younger grade levels. And honestly, we have a lot of things planned, but if you want to learn more and follow along, our website is arisingtide.design.
That's awesome. Thank you, Christina, for sharing that. And I'll also be sharing these things at the end as well, where everybody can reach folks and connect. I want to get to the audience questions, but before I do, because we had a late start, I want to make sure that we finish this off. DeQuese, you talked about creating a new table and new chairs, and maybe you don't even want to be at that table. You've already done a lot of work in our community. Talk to us about this new VP at Metro Group, and how are you going to be influencing folks and actually creating your own table, or what is that? Please talk to the audience about that.
I think I was like in the zone when I was talking about that, but I will elaborate on it. There's a quote, I'm gonna read it now. It was like, I want to be at a table where I will be seated next to people who want to change as much as I do. That's from Martin St. Victor.
DeQuese, you're on mute. You just went on mute somehow.
It was so good.
Martin
It was so
St. Victor.
It was so good. Martin
We
St.
heard
Victor.
you.
Did you get my quote?
We got you. We got your quote.
Man, I'm like,
And
I
you did
fat
a mic
fingers
drop.
or something. I did a mic drop and left, but like that quote kind of, it stuck with me. And I read that quote like a couple of years ago. So I had like a pandemic to like think about it. And you proposed that question, and I'm sitting there and I'm like looking at an RFP, and I'm like, there's like 1 million tables, like 1 million different tables on this RFP. Maybe not 1 million, but you know, a lot. Yeah. And some seat 2, some seat 3, some seat 30. And in my head, I'm like, is the table that I'm trying to sit at, the table that I'm trying to fit in with, like, is there even another space there for me to sit in that table? Yeah. Or are they serving the food that I want to eat? Mm-hmm. And that made me kind of like take a step back, and I was like, all right, well, I know I'm a little different. In talking to my peers and my friends, mm-hmm. we all have intricacies about us that drive us and make us who we are. And sometimes the runway that has been given to us doesn't benefit our takeoff path. Yep. So when I think about a table, it's maybe I want to sit Indian style around the fire and roast some marshmallows. You know, maybe it's mm-hmm. you got a barbecue and a picnic table, right? Like maybe I'm eating in my car because I got to get to a meeting. Regardless of it's, you know, that quote of being able to be around people that think like you or want to think like you, or maybe take in some of what, just being open to it. So when I think about everybody keeps saying, sit at the table, sit at the table, sit at the table, that's that same damn table. I don't want to sit there, but like, there's plenty of natural resources around. There's plenty of people. There's plenty of smart minds and designers. Why can't we just build another table? And I think there's enough room in the industry, in the world, for us to do that, to have other places where people feel safe, they can be their best self, and most importantly, they can thrive. Because if somebody thrives, they get better. And when they get better, they push someone else to get better. Then that competition thing happens, and we make each other as people and as an industry better as a whole. And, you know, that's kind of my whole thing with, you know, creating, you know, another table. Like, maybe it's not a table, maybe we just walk and talk and eat, but we're there together, we're there open to learn, and it's respectful. So
Yeah.
that was kind of my spiel on that. But yeah, it's like, that's that saying, like, you just, it's like a check box. Like, I want to sit at the table, I want to sit at the table. It's like, no, I'm gonna go over here and eat this other restaurant, right? Or I'm a brick and mortar it myself.
Spoken like a true leader, DeQuese. I look forward to seeing what type of table you are now creating at Metro.
Hope it's got some
Okay,
legs.
so now we haven't been able to get to all the questions, but we got to quite a few. Now I'd like to get to the audience, and there's a couple of questions in here. And Elijah, are you able to read the questions and or allow folks to get on, the folks from the audience to get on and ask the question themselves?
Okay. So I don't know if I'd be able to get people to actually ask, but I can read some of the questions that have been posed to us. And if anyone feels like they'd like to contribute to an answer, that'd be great. So I'm gonna start with the first one here that from Tom Dorenzo, which is, what is being done to inspire a wider range of high school or even grade school students to think about joining our profession and therefore making it more diverse?
Yeah. And now you guys can all unmute yourselves and just jump into the
I
question.
totally raised my hand like somebody was like gonna call on me. Tom Dorenzo, great question. How are you? I hope you're well. I honestly think it's time. I think we invest in, not to throw shade anywhere, but when you have anything that you put effort, you put time, and you put care into, like, sometimes those things take a while to come to fruition. So when we have an initiative for diversity, equity, inclusion, it can't be for 1 year. Like, a lot of years happen to get us here. So it's going to take a lot of years to get us back to like an even playing field. So to your question, Tom, like, I honestly think it is, you know, with high school, middle school, it is starting, and the storytelling that Christina is talking about, but it's letting them see people that look like them in higher roles, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
as we were talking about, like, going through that leadership page, I go through a lot of leadership pages. The reason I chose Metro is because there's a president that looks like me. He, not saying that like he knows everything about me, but like there is a commonality and a common ground where I felt comfortable. And I think that if we do see more people of color that we can relate to in, you know, executive kind of positions, then I think that works, but it doesn't happen overnight. Like, we have to be in the community of Oakland, in the community of San Francisco. And it, like I said, it's not a year, and it has to be, you meet a kid at, and I've done this, and that's why I'm saying it, you meet a kid and like he's in 4th grade and he has no idea what he's gonna do, but you still see him in mentor things. And by the time he's like in 8th grade, like he has an idea of kind of like what he likes. And then 8 years later, you get an email and it's like, you were so right. Like, this is great. I'm glad you told me about looking into business. And this is a seed that was planted with like 10 years ago. And I'm like on the other side of the country, and I get this random email from a kid that I mentored. And it was because someone told a story, someone was persistent, they gave them attention, and they saw the result product. They were able to go online or Google or whatever and see that whoever they were speaking to or talking about or want influence from looks a little bit like them. And that speaks volumes.
That's big.
I
And
think to tack on to that really
Yeah, go
quick. Yes, it's visibility, but I think it's also like, how do we, not visibility just as the people that comprise our industry? Because I think on the design side, it's more so like also how do we make design a viable career that is marketed in a way that makes people want to join our career. We know, like, literally, I feel like if you ask any 5-year-old, they're like, I want to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an athlete, because those have just always been very well marketed careers. And I think to that point, to kind of slightly not take away from our EDI group, but to just like bolster what we're doing, but I'd want to shout out our advocacy team at the chapter. I think they're doing really great work in making our career and what we do as a profession more solidified, and, you know, determining what commercial interior design is and how do we get that voice into the government, into politics, and then how do we further project that voice out to our community as at large. So I think between the mix of advocacy and EDI, we can really do things special to really bring in people that look more of like comprise some of the people that look like on this call. So I think that's the other part is like, it's not really an answer. It's more of like a question. Sometimes you gotta meet a question with a question, but it's how do we really, you know, market what we do on a day-to-day basis in a way that is appealing to these younger children.
Yeah. And the big part to all of that is that EDI, DE&I, all of this, it's a journey. Like DeQuese said, this doesn't unpack itself overnight. And that's why we're having these conversations, but also just bringing it up so companies can just start taking small steps to create some changes. Because yes, people do scroll your page on your website, look at what the leadership looks like, see who's on there. And when you don't see folks that look like yourself, you're like, will I feel like I fit in that organization? Or will I be able to be a person to add and build onto that culture? That's really good. We have a few more questions in here. Elijah, do we have another one we want to answer, or?
Yeah, so we got two here that I think would be fun. One from Kate Rancourt. It seems that the ones who define professional dress is and has historically been white males and females. So how can we shift the narrative around what professional dress means from a diverse group of people and not just those who come from privilege?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. Do you guys want to talk about the difference here in the Bay Area? But Maddy, I think it kind of goes back to a little bit of something you guys all address this to some degree, but how do we switch the narrative?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's what like you said, what everyone was saying. I think it's so important. I love that we're all here together and that we, you know, I think have all kind of gotten to a place, or like Roderick, you know, have been working on it for a long time, but gotten to a place where we feel like, look, we're going to show up authentically as much as we can. And I think that's really where, honestly, I think it takes people. Like, I think it takes people like us, and I think it takes people like Ria. And it's personally, I guess that's how I look at it. I mean, it's all about representation and how, you know, how your peers and how your leaders look and show up and dress. Honestly, I think it was like DeQuese who said it during one of our sessions. He was talking about how in tech, like here, you know, you've got like all these young leaders who are showing up wearing like Crocs and like t-shirts and jeans. And so it shows to their employees that it's cool to do that. Like, it's okay to do that. And it sets a tone. It sets the, you know, precedent for it. And I think that's how you start to shift the conversation. That's how you shift the narrative.
Yep.
it's all about showing up like that and making it okay for other people to show up like that, you know?
Why do I feel like it's interesting? We're the design folks, but I feel like tech leads the way in some of the trends here in the Bay Area. For instance, talk about changing a culture or either allowing people to feel comfortable. Gusto, you cannot wear shoes in that place. I don't know if you guys have ever visit Gusto. You've got to literally take your shoes off and they will give you a pair of socks if you're not wearing any, and I was not that day. And you walk around barefoot. And I don't know if you guys have ever walked around in a pair of socks in a professional setting. It's slightly uncomfortable. It does a shift for you when I'm somebody who wears heels all the time. And
those are our office slippers. Everyone
yes,
has a pair.
You have to wear slippers at Gusto or socks.
That could be
and
cultural.
That is a huge shift. So that's a really good example of like tech leading the way, but we're the design folks. And why do we say people have to look a certain way? Almost like it was almost faux pas to have a tattoo, to show up with too many tattoos to a client, to like win a client, you know. Let's talk.
I want to throw in a little bit of a radical idea here. I know we always say, you know, it should start from the top down. We should see the people that look like us, our bosses. If we want to dress a certain way, we should have, you know, the certain, you know, leeway or like the influence to dress this way based on the way that our bosses dress. But like, I'm also a person where I think, you know, again, to be very frank, you know, we had the, you know, the big recession in 2008, and we always talk about how people left the industry. And then we had the pandemic, and I think everyone knew about the Great Resignation. So I think it's also kind of an onus on people in a sense to kind of, you know, get with the times a little bit. Because it's like the fact of like, do you want to lose talent, or do you want to be able to come around to changing your thinking in terms of the way that people dress? Because personally, I don't ever see the workplace going back to a place of slacks and button-ups, skirts and dresses. But if that is personally going to be your thinking, then I think you're in the risk of losing talent. And we're kind of at a point in our industry where I don't know if we can lose much more talent. So I think it's a little bit of like, you know, be brave and be bold to show up as who you are. And it's kind of one of those places where like, if those people aren't going to accept you, then you know that there's someone better out there for you. And it's unfortunate because I don't think, again, like we should be recognizing that we don't want to lose talent over the fact that maybe somebody wants to wear holy jeans. Because I remember that used to be like an absolute no-no.
Yes. Times are changing. Thank you, Roderick, for bringing that up as well. Elijah, do we have another question that we want to unpack? And Christina, thank you for even showing us a real live model of your slippers, because you are in your office actually.
Yeah, we've got one more question here that's from Ruben Korakupomi. And it goes, how do you react to performative gestures towards DE&I at companies or within the industry? And I want to answer this one so bad. Is I confront it. I'm just gonna, like, I think it's offensive to put on the like veneer of inclusion and diversity. I know that Rashanda and I have had this conversation a few times where we're just like, what are we going to do here in NorCal for the IIDA? Is it going to be something where it's like, hey, we want to, you know, make sure that people see us doing something at the same time that everyone else is riding a wave? Or do we want to make sure that our actions speak for our intent? And I will say that for myself, I feel like you have to confront those who are in a position to, you know, who are their branding people, their marketing people, their leaders who say, this is what we're doing, but there's no meat behind it. There's no true desire to educate and inform, to build allies and advocates. To me, it's have the conversation about what are you trying to achieve? Because I think we've gone through years and years and years and years and decades of diversity and inclusion that we need to say, like, don't just do the song and dance, but enrich my soul, enrich those that you are actually getting eyeballs to see the message you're sending out to. So confront them, have the conversation, and ask them to really think and grow is how I've personally done it. That's just me personally. So
I love the think and grow part, but can we read that question again one more time? Because something else is kind of triggering in my head there.
How do you react to performative gestures towards DE&I at companies or within the industry?
Let's talk about what's the definition of a performative gesture? What is an example of a performative gesture? My first thought, and maybe we can all share, my first thought is like just posting for the sake of posting these different things, but it doesn't really represent what's happening in the organization. That's my first thought.
Posting these things as in like the
posting on Instagram, posting on LinkedIn, different things that are supposed to represent what your company culture is. But if it's not really in your DNA of your company culture, then it's a false advertisement in my book.
I'm also going to be a cheap car salesman really quick. It's very funny that this question came up because this is a 3-part conversation series, and the third conversation, which will be live in October, actually has to do with performative allyism and our role as designers in gentrification. So you should show up.
Yes. I did want to say, like, I left the corporate world to start my own firm before all of this DEI stuff became trendy, but similar to this movement, I guess you could say, is that like when I was at a big firm, there was a lot of talk about how to make it more hospitable or like more accommodating to parents and mothers in particular. And I feel like any change that you want to see in a company, like, yes, call it out, but also be prepared to be part of the solution. Because I give people the benefit of the doubt. I want to believe that it came from a good place. And maybe they just really don't know how to see it through. And so be part of the solution, come up with ideas, and be ready to put the time into helping them, actually make it authentic. But change typically takes a long time. And so I know you have to be patient, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try.
Yeah. DeQuese, Maddy.
Want to go, Maddy? I can go all day. I'm kidding. I think I as a partner of a company, like you invest in like the people that work there as well. And you feel the messages that come out. And then sometimes when you're at that point, like, let's call it what it is, like when we were going through the pandemic and all the racial duress was coming through, Black Lives Matter, Asian hate, right? And these things happen, and you sit and you wait. You're like, is my company going to say anything? Like, are they going to like have a backbone? Are they going to stand up for me? And usually what happens is one progressive company like kicks the bucket, right? And they're like, forget what everybody else says. Like, we're going to stand on our 2 feet and we're going to do this.
Yep.
Then you see an avalanche effect of like everybody else like tapping on and doing it because this person did it, right? This leader did it. So it's like, how can we have other leaders not wait for people to, kind of stand out and say something that's wrong? But my thing to me was there's not a ton of us that work in companies. So you could probably go through and sift and find out which ones might be thinking about it, and who's associated with, some actions or events that have happened. And maybe HR could reach out and say, hey, how are you? Or maybe a manager. But those are things that usually and typically are misses. So us as an employee, like that's, kind of how we feel, right? So it's like, if you go to bat for me, like when that phone rings at 8:00 p.m. and my TV's on, like I'm gonna answer it because I know my company has my back. But then you have what kind of happened, and what I saw was a lot of Me Too's, and not to confuse it with Me Too, but Me Too, right? And it's like you sit there and you're kind of like, well, you get this idea of like, well, if they're only gonna do work hours, then I'm gonna only do work hours, right? And then you have someone not giving their all to something, and then they're not in turn being their best selves, and the company suffers as well. So it's this whole circle effect, but I think things could be done granularly at the ground level of just saying, hey, how you doing?
Yes.
I know it happened with a lot of peers, and maybe it like was like my company when I was at the tech company that I was at, like nobody called me, nobody reached out. But there was one person that was on my team that was like, hey, DeQuese, like, how's everything? That goes beyond, you know, anything, just that simple, your care, right? Like you have empathy, you're taking time out of your day to see how your teammate, your buddy, your partner is doing. And what you don't know is in the background is that lights a fire under them to be just as influential and empathetic with you as well. So when I kind of like took a look at it, I was like, whoa, well, here goes Nike, right? And then it's like, oh, there's Facebook, Twitter, bloop, 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 bloop. And then everybody like a week later started doing stuff. And I'm like, I wonder if they reached out to the person, because that's who shows up to work. And that's what I really wish I saw more. And I wish that companies would do more, is kind of be more personal. But sometimes it, you know, we're too big and we can't do that, right?
We all have one-on-ones.
Yeah.
All you have to do is take a moment, and this is either from leadership or, you know, we do a lot of side collaborations with each other. It's just checking in. Sometimes it's not a huge, big thing that people are waiting for a company to take action. It's just, can you hold space for me? Can we hold space for each other?
It's an exhale.
Yeah.
You're like literally thinking about it all day. You're like, all right, I saw this on the news last night. My Instagram feed's full of it. My Facebook feed's full of it. And I get to work and it's just like crickets. It's like, somebody say something.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think just to add on, it really becomes like in terms of how to react to it, for me, it becomes a combination of all the three things that we've kind of talked about. You kind of have to confront it, you know, recognize that something's being done that, you know, you're not necessarily a fan of and feels very performative and not genuine. You maybe roll your eyes, take a side, take a break, take a moment. And then to Christina's point, you know, you need to come to the table with solutions or, you know, ways that we can really think about fixing these actions. And then on the other part is like, you know, reaching out to people just to, you know, even if nobody's reaching out to you, just like reach out to other people. I had a thing like where I would always be like, I would ask people like, have you taken a break today? Like, because I think during the pandemic, we also just got into a zone of work hours were so blurred that like you could easily work from 9 to 9. And it was not an issue because you were at home, but like just asking people to like take a break was like a way of checking in with them and be like, how are you doing? But I also find that it's like really like one, coming to the table with solutions and then recognizing, you know, what is the performative issue that you're kind of upset with. Because I think there's so many performative issues. So I could talk about it all day, like why companies change their logo to a pride flag during Pride Month, or why they only put out statements about, you know, Black history during Black History Month. I feel like that generally is very performative in its action because you're only doing it for the month that it happens to be in. If you're really truly about equity, diversity, and inclusion, you should probably try to figure out a social media strategy or campaign where you're highlighting all these various companies, groups, communities, ethnicities throughout the entire year.
Yeah. Powerful stuff. Elijah, this is only our first conversation of 3. This is a 3-part series. This was the very first one. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Does not look like it. I just want to thank our speakers. You guys were phenomenal today, and you were so vulnerable. You really dove into a lot of these things, and I think we all agree that design should be free from bias, but we all have our own biases. But I think this is also about having allies that are well positioned to help move the needle on all of these things, and to work together is sort of like what we all talked about, having compassion for one another, doing better together, doing better as organizations, doing better as an industry, and not ceasing, like not giving up on this topic, not giving up on the problem, not giving up on the process of DE&I and ED&I, and its journey. Like, I'm getting a little emotional, but really not giving up on this. Seriously. That's my little spiel. I want to have an opportunity for each of you guys to share with the audience where they can reach you, anything that you want them to know about before we close and stop the recording. But I just want to thank all of you guys again. And Elijah, thank you for running the show. But DeQuese, let's start with you.
Thanks for putting this on. IIDA, Rashanda, Roderick, Elijah, Heather behind the scenes. Panel was awesome. The conversations leading up to it were definitely thought-provoking. I had a good time. It was fun to see some folks again. But I will just leave it with this. Just leave the world better than you found it.
Love that. Love that. Christina.
Yeah, thanks so much for this talk. It was very real, more real than a lot of panels I've been on before. Did you mention that, I guess just another plug for arisingtide.design. If you want to reach us, there's a place that allows you to reach us. There's many of us on the founding team, and I'd love to hear, the rest of the team, I'm sure, would love to hear what you have to say and any ideas you have. So please reach out to us through that. And if we're going to kind of leave things with an inspirational quote or thought, I guess every little action counts. And I think if you want to see change in the world, be part of that action rather than sitting back and complaining. I guess I always try to live by that.
I love that. So, I love this panel, such smart people and inspirational. Maddy, what are your words that you want to leave us with? Where can we find you on your beautiful Instagram? What do you want to share?
Thank you. Well, thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. It's like a great group of friends, and I love that we're just talking about some real stuff. Yeah, you can find me at Nalea Interiors. That's my Instagram handle. I honestly just started the platform because I noticed that there's not a lot of people who look like me, who are in the forward-facing space of design, and that's just why I started it. So if you want to check it out, go ahead. I will leave you with, it's not a quote by me, but if anyone hasn't read this book, More Than Enough, by Elaine Welteroth, I would highly recommend it, especially for women of color. And I just love her quote. She says, sometimes just being yourself is the radical act. When you occupy space in systems that weren't built for you, your authenticity is your activism. And yeah, I'll leave it with that.
Love that one too. I almost feel like I want that shirt. I want a t-shirt.
Should we make those? I think we should.
I want a t-shirt that says that. Roderick, last but not least, again, my friend, you have crafted something really beautiful for our industry. Thank you for joining the committee, first of all, for ED&I. Thank you for your creativity. Thank you for your knowledge. You put together, people have not seen the package, but it's beautiful. We're actually talking about possibly having these as collector's posters because the graphic work for this is so beautiful. But please, what do you want to leave the audience with today?
Yeah, I'm never the most affluent of words when it comes to leaving people with good messages, but I always just tell people, really, it's like I live by these kind of few tenets recently, I think after the pandemic, is like, one, just take a breath. Two, uncenter yourself sometimes. Like sometimes you put yourself at the middle of a storm and like you imagine that the problems are all evolving around you. But if you really uncenter yourself and take a look at it from the outside, I think you just have a better perspective of how to solve those issues. And three, just like, recognize how you're feeling every day. Generally, like every day doesn't have to be a good day, but at least if you make it through, you've made it a good day. So that's my thing.
Elijah, do you have anything to top that off with?
Thank you all for joining us today. This was great. If you are inspired or interested or feel like you are ready to put some of your own energy out into the world in the EDI, DE&I, come join the IIDA NorCal's chapter. I've put a link to our site. Check it out. Think about it. And then reach out to us. Be part of the conversation. Be part of the effort.